Okay, so our topic tonight is spiritual disciplines, pathways or obstacles to freedom. So you've got a handout in front of you, hopefully. You can look at the back if you want to. There's not a rule about that. And so here's my guess, either you were here because you were really interested in the topic, or because you didn't know what the topic was, and now you're feeling a bit of, why am I here? Why is there pressure? Maybe you're squirming in your chair because you feel like, I'm not going to like this. And I'm not sure what comes to mind when you think about spiritual disciplines, but my guess is the feel might be daunting. Either there's a feel like, I don't know if I'm a super Christian enough to do that. Am I mature enough to do disciplines? Or maybe you feel what people have used before, the term a should storm, where you're all of a sudden feeling all of the shoulds you need to do. Well, I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I should be. I should be doing all of these things, and that's kind of what you're feeling as we're talking about spiritual disciplines, of all of the things that you think that you should be doing, but have no idea how you would even fit them into your life. And so I think spiritual disciplines can be kind of a hard topic because it often can carry this feeling of guilt with it, and maybe a frustration or bad experience in the past. One of the things that I'm hoping that we do tonight is that this is trying to create a space where it's not all down, like, I need to do better. He told me I need to do better. But a space to actually think more critically about spiritual disciplines and the things that undergird them, the why behind them. So we're going to kind of travel a bit. We're going to go on a few detours. And really my intention is to help us kind of get our minds around some of the things. So we're on a bit of a journey, and I hope that's okay. So, a good point to start might be, what do we mean by spiritual disciplines? So in his book, The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, JT's always brings books, so I feel like I have to also. Yeah, it's another discipline. Yeah, book bringing is important for this. Yeah, he says this. He says, God has given us the disciplines of the spiritual life as a means of receiving His grace. The disciplines allow us to place ourselves before God so He can transform us. I think that's really good. The disciplines allow us to place ourselves before God so that He can transform us. The disciplines aren't some magic powder you just sprinkle on your spiritual life and then up it grows. But their context, they're places where you can go to receive God's grace. And so that's what I want us to explore, of how do I put myself in a place to receive His grace because I know that I need it. And one of the things we're going to be exploring a little bit deeper tonight is, I really do need His grace. And here are some of the reasons why. Again, I know this is really positive and uplifting. I'm trying to do that. Richard Foster also just gives a list of what he calls classical spiritual disciplines. And by classical, he doesn't mean that they're best paired with Beethoven or Bach. What he means is that these are the ones that Christians have practiced historically through time. So the historic disciplines. And this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list. It's not meant to be the only list, but it's just the list that he gives. And I think it's helpful, specifically because it looks at three different dimensions, kind of inward spiritual disciplines, outward spiritual disciplines, and then corporate spiritual disciplines. So inward might be things like meditation, prayer, fasting, study. Outward, it could be simplicity, which just means living a simple life, direct life, solitude, submission, service. Corporate could be confession, worship, guidance, and celebration. And some of you might say, you know what? If these are just lists, do we just get to pick our favorite and do those? I will take celebration and solitude together and get to go celebrate all by myself with no one else around. Doesn't that seem great? And I will let someone else do fasting and confession because we all have our own gifts in the church, right? It's not meant to be a just choose one from each list and hope you get by, but giving an idea of what different spiritual disciplines look like. And as you can see, they're varied. It's all different kinds of things. Even if worship might be something that makes sense, but confession as a discipline, especially because if you notice, that wasn't an internal, that was a corporate, confessing to another person. So, yeah, where do we go? Our first detour is in freedom and formation. Cities, stores, streets, and us. So what I wanted to do here is think about how we live in our built environment. Okay, so we're detouring, all right? So don't try to immediately connect this to spiritual disciplines. We're detouring. The question is, our built environment that we're in, what does it make possible and what does it make impossible? Okay, so I'll give a few examples. I've lived in two very, very different North American cities. One of them is Houston, Texas. The other is Vancouver, Canada. Now, who's been to Houston? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Wow, lots of us. Great. Everyone should go for the rodeo. I'm not sure if you should go for anything else. But Houston is this it's flat. It is flat, 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 flat. There is nothing bounding its space until you get to the Gulf of Mexico, which is an hour away. I mean, it's just flat everywhere. And the way that Houston has been built has two important features. First is that Houston has very little zoning. That's one of the things it's proud of. To say we're a city that doesn't do zoning. People can build wherever they want. We're Texas. Also, what it does is it just built. What they do is that they have freeways going everywhere. Then it's doing ring after ring after ring after ring. I think they're on their fourth. They're either third or fourth ring right now. They just keep going out. And the thing about what that makes possible for Houston is you can live really, really far away from downtown, but still manage to get in. Like you can live way off the grid, but still be able to get in town. Or you can go anywhere in 25 minutes, barring major traffic, which there is at different times. But there's a lot of things that are impossible in Houston. One of those things that they're trying to figure out is how do we do public transportation when everyone is so spread out? How do you do that? How do you kind of make the city friendly for the person who wants to walk places, especially when it's 100 degrees in the summer? Like, can you do that? Versus Vancouver, where it is incredibly tightly bounded by water on two sides, by mountain on another side, by city limits on the other side. Vancouver is incredibly tight. And Vancouver chose back in the 60s and 70s to use their money that other cities were investing in freeways to build public buses and to build a public bus system. So what that makes possible is that, like, Kristen and I lived our first year in Vancouver without a car, which is like a cardinal sin for a Southerner. It's like, wait, you can live without a car? How do you live without a car? You need the car. The car is life. But we lived there for a year without a car because you can take buses places, you can walk places. We lived a 10-minute walk to the beach, a 5-minute walk to multiple grocery stores, a 3-minute walk to the bus stop. I mean, it's just, you can do it without a car. And so it makes that kind of life possible. But what it makes impossible is living far out or even being able to spread things out. So because people have to live so tightly together, the prices just go because everyone's trying to get there. So those are just examples of how the built environment affects what you can do and can't do, what it makes possible or impossible. Maybe you think about Walmart, another built environment that's built for a very specific purpose. You think about Walmart, that all of the clues that this is all about price. It's all about price and scale. Because what do you see? You see an enormous parking lot. You see a building that didn't cost anything to build with huge, clear signs and no detail. Like one Walmart here could be the same as any other Walmart anywhere else. And then you go in and it's massive amounts of stuff, and the game you play is how do I get the cheapest thing possible. So that's what Walmart makes possible. But what it makes impossible often is actually having real relationships with the food you're buying or the people who are producing it or even some of the clerks, because rather than the clerks being experts into a certain thing, like you might find if you go to a nice wine and cheese store, that the clerks don't necessarily know anything because there's so much stuff in Walmart. Another thing, here's the last thing about what makes possible or impossible. Where is your house located? Where you live? What kind of street is it on? I remember back in COVID, I was kind of dropping off some packs for families for stuff they were doing at home. And I remember driving around one day and dropping off several packets, and I was like, wait, every single person I've dropped off a packet to lives in a cul-de-sac. And part of that's our area, that there are a lot of cul-de-sacs and a lot of neighborhoods. There's nothing necessarily good or bad about that. It just is. But you think about how what's possible or impossible, whether you live on a cul-de-sac or live in a grid, like a grid-type neighborhood, or you live on a main road, right? That the kinds of things that you would do in your front yard are very different. That if you live on a main road, one of the things that makes impossible is parking your car far from the curb, or because you're going to get your mirror taken off, right? But if you live in a cul-de-sac, you can park like 4 feet from the curb because no one cares, right? And it changes other things. So think about if you're in a cul-de-sac, if you see a strange car go by or a stranger, immediately, like, your alarms go up because strangers aren't allowed in cul-de-sacs. But if you live on a main road, that you'd be used to seeing different kinds of people or different people coming by because that's what you do. So our built environment affects our expectations, it affects how we live our lives, and often that we get used to our built environments and start living in such a way that fits with our built environments. Okay, so just tracking here. What about the infrastructure of our lives? How does the infrastructure of our lives affect our life? What does it make possible or impossible? How does the built lifestyle that we've made, what does it make possible or impossible? As I was preparing for this, thinking about it starting about a month or two ago, I found 2 different articles from secular sources about these kinds of things. I just thought I would read a little bit of. This is one from Axios News. One of their reporters is talking about their experience with COVID. After recovering from a mild COVID case in November, I developed long COVID with debilitating symptoms that included persistent shortness of breath, heart palpitations, and insomnia. At one point, I counted 23 symptoms. As my symptoms grew worse, I was admitted to the hospital where I underwent numerous tests. Thankfully, no major organ damage was found. Why it mattered? Long COVID was an alarm bell that I needed to make huge changes in my life. Before getting hit with this life-changing illness, I frankly hadn't taken great care of myself. I let stress and anxiety get to me. I ate poorly, drank too much coffee, and rarely made time for exercise. But very soon I realized if I'm going to get better, I need to completely change my life. I'd never be able to go back to those bad habits. So I improvised a 3-ingredient recipe for recovery. Number 1, structure. Following a daily routine is my new lifeblood. Almost every hour of my day is scheduled. Number 2, pace, so that on days I'm fatigued, my list of tasks is shorter. Faith. Thinking positively has always been challenging for me, but with daily prayer and meditation, it's getting easier. The mind is a powerful instrument. I'm learning to use it for my betterment, not detriment. Bottom line, in a lot of ways, I'm healthier than I was before getting COVID. And so this is someone who learned that the built environment of their life was not going to work given the new illness that they had. And so they changed the built environment of their life in order to be able to live in a different kind of way. Here's another thing. This one's a little bit funnier. This is from The Atlantic by a guy named Jason Heller. He says, this is just, oh, if only we could all do these kind of things. A few years ago, my wife, Angie, and I made a pact. Every Sunday, we swore to each other we will abstain from work, and we kept our promise. On the second day of each weekend, we start our morning and end our night by binging TV in bed. In the middle of the day, we binge TV on the couch, taking breaks exclusively to nap or read. The door of our apartment is opened only for pizza to be slid inside. Chores go undone, fitness is spurned, job-related emails and texts are not read. When we feel the familiar anxiety creeping in and imagine our inboxes filling up or our muscles turning to jelly, we're tempted to act, but we fight to stay still. He talks about how that in our culture is that it used to be, at least for some people, that their jobs created margin for them. But not so much today, is that more and more individuals can't rely on societal norms or even their own employers to draw that line for them. They have to do it themselves. And he goes on to talk about why they do this, and he said getting to see each other again might be the most important reason to pause work. Not just to fuel up in preparation for more work later on, but for the sake of the pause itself. Although Angie and I aren't religious, we really do think of our secular day of rest as sacred. That's why we take pains to protect it, even when it means turning down some career opportunities or the next week becoming a little more stressful. When you take away all the tasks you might feel pressured to do on a Sunday, what you're left with isn't an absence, it's an opening. So these are people who said, wow, that we're going to intentionally restrict and limit ourselves to only do binge watching TV and reading books on Sundays. And they saying that the reason is because it creates an opening for other things. There are other things that get to happen. It's not cutting freedom, it's creating freedom, creating that space. So what does the infrastructure of your life make possible or impossible? How does the infrastructure of your life, of my life, shape what we do or don't do, or what we could have or not have? Now, some of this is stuff that we have some amount of control over, but much of it is stuff that we don't have control over, or is stuff that is actively trying to force us into a certain kind of life, a certain kind of way of being. And this is where it gets a bit more insidious when we start talking about the infrastructure or the things that work in our life. So how does social media form you? Or maybe to ask more bluntly, what does Facebook or Instagram want from you? Well, they want your time and content, right? So how do they get it? Well, encouraging you to share your content and then constantly feeding you more and more and more content so that you will spend more and more time seeing ads. And we'll use their algorithms so that you will see what they want you to see in hopes that you will stay there longer to become a better consumer for them and their business model, right? So you probably noticed that the feed has no end and that there is no timer that comes up that says, we realize that you've been on here long enough. We would like to temporarily cut your access, because that's not their game. They want you to consume maximally because it's to their benefit. So what about news and other TV programs? Well, I think they want the same thing. They want you to become a consumer. They want you to become a loyal follower. They want you to imbibe all of their stuff. And one of the ways they do that is by giving us compelling storylines that activate our hearts, right? So there is no program these days that just gives the facts in a nondescript way. They all tell stories. They have narratives that they're giving us to draw us in. I remember this became really clear to me. Probably I was in college at home watching a meaningless college football bowl game. And I was trying to figure out, why am I still watching this game? Like, these are bad teams playing bad football, and I could be doing something outside because it's in Texas, so you could go outside around New Year's. And I realized what they were doing is they were giving all the backstories for these players and the coaches and trying to say why this game was so important because of the story of the coaches and players that were a part of this bad football game. They're trying to draw me in through this narrative. And this happens in all different ways, whether in sports or even in weather or even in news, that there's a narrative that's trying to draw our hearts into it. Now, the best programs that we watch probably play on our higher values, such as beauty, goodness, and truth. We can probably think of different things that we've watched that say, wow, this is actually drawing me to want and desire good things. This is actually making me dream or feel or experience or empathize in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if I wasn't experiencing this medium of communication. But there are other things that stoke fear and stoke anger and stoke self-righteousness that we can all know of and we understand when that's happening. And they're all ways that they're enticing us to depend on them. So even stores as innocuous as Chick-fil-A want to make you a loyal customer, right? They want your experience to be as good as possible so that you're coming back and come back, come back, come back. So all of these places in our world want us. They want our time, they want our talent, they want our treasure, they want our hearts. They want, I would say, our worship. Because worship, in a biblical sense, is giving worth to something. So it's not like we only worship God, it's that we worship whatever we give our worth to, or whatever we believe is worthy. So what God desires is that our worship will be rightly ordered, with Him at the top and everything else way beneath it. But it's still, those things want our worship. They want our hearts. So my guess is a lot of these kind of things aren't something new. This isn't probably completely revelatory for us all, but I want to create space for us to think about these things and the different ways that these pulls are happening in our life because they all want our hearts, and we don't want them to control us. Here's what James K. Smith in this book, You Are What You Love, says. This is a book where he talks about cultural liturgies, which are patterns of life in our world that want to bring us in and want to draw us into doing things. And he says this: our cultural practices are habit-forming, love-shaping rituals that get a hold of our hearts and aim our loves. Our loves and imaginations are conscripted by all sorts of liturgies that are loaded with a vision of the good life. To be immersed in those secular liturgies is to be habituated to long for what they promise. Now, you might be surprised to hear that this is his general audience book. This isn't his technical version. This is his general audience book, and he still can't get away from using big words. But he admits, as a philosopher, that's what he does. He uses big words. But he says that what these things do around us, they don't just want our time, they don't just want our attention, but that really what they want is to aim our loves or other emotions. They want to aim those things for us. And we have to be aware of, what is this thing that I'm participating in trying to aim me towards? Or from. That's right. Yeah, what is it, but where is it aiming me? What is it trying to do to me? And becoming aware of those things when we're engaging with them. Okay. We're going to detour a little bit again. Habits are amazing and terrible. Can anyone describe to me how many times on their way here they applied the brake, pushed on the accelerator, or looked in their mirrors? Like, no. Maybe you can't even remember whether you put the blinker on or not. No judgment, no judgment. But those things, they happen naturally because we've been driving for long periods of time. We're used to driving. We're driving on the correct side of the road. So they just happen. They've become habits. Our mind just takes over, or our learned behaviors just take over, and we drive without even thinking sometimes of where we're going. So maybe that allows us for things like good conversations, or listening to music, or thinking about something, or who knows what else we might do, but it gives us space for those things to happen. I mean, can you imagine if every time you drove, it was like driving in a place you were unfamiliar with, or every time you were driving was like driving on the opposite side of the road, if you've ever been to a British country where you drive on the left side of the road? I mean, that would be terrifying. To every driving experience to be that stressful. I know when I'm in a new place, one of the things that happens is I am much more likely to snap at anyone who's in the car with me than if I'm in a place I know where I am. Because we're using so much more of our mind to do those things. But habits, practices, almost allow our mind to go on autopilot. So we can drive places, not even being aware of where we're going, and think about higher, more important things. So habits can be beautiful. I think God's wired us incredibly. I mean, there's so many things that we do probably every day without really even thinking about what we're doing. So eating. How many of you said to your hand, okay, hand, pick up the sandwich, bring it to your mouth, mouth open, and then take a bite? It just happens naturally. Or brushing your teeth, or flossing, maybe. Even speaking English. Like, these are all things that we have so much energy freed up when we're doing them because they're habits. They become so ingrained in us, and it's a great thing. It's great that our bodies remember the way we do things. I remember when I was in Spain for a semester in college that I was really, really tired when I was there. And I realized that why I was tired is because I was having to speak a different language almost all the time. And it's just wearing on you. But we speak English regularly, and we've been speaking English for years and years and years, and it's natural for us, and so it doesn't tire us out like the way speaking a foreign language or even having to act different around different company might make us. So habits can be really, really good. But, of course, habits can be really bad, too. So whether they are benign things, like picking our nose when no one's looking, or habitually checking our phones as soon as we have nothing else to do, or eating and drinking when we're sad, or telling ourselves stories about a coworker that they're a blah, 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 every time we think of them, or choosing to be bitter every time an experience is brought up, or reacting in anger if someone crosses us. In all of those things, and many of them, they are habits. There was a first time doing them, there was a second time doing them, there was a third time doing them, and eventually they got ingrained within us, is that we just did them naturally. It was like making ruts in our heart or our mind were made so that once we get on that track, we can't help but go all the way down, even if we don't want to. So habits can be terrible for us as well, seemingly leading us to destinations that we don't want to go. We don't feel like we have control of not going there. So, and I think that in this, when we start to ponder, we realize that we become our habits. The things that we habitually do, we become. The next book to think about is, this was a really helpful perspective. This is Justin Whitmore Early. He's a Richmond author. We're using this book in our small group currently. And one of the things that he talks about with habits is it's not just that habits take us to behaviors that we don't want to engage in, but actually that they can instill wrong beliefs. So I want you to listen to what he says, because you might say, "Huh? I don't get that," but I think he's right. So listen, he talks about, now these are all his personal ones. He says, habit, waking up exhausted again because I never get to bed on time. What's the wrong belief that builds in? I am not a creature. I am infinite. My body will be fine. I am a God. Habit 2, look at work emails on my phone before getting out of bed. What's the wrong belief? I can miss a quiet time, but I can't miss a quick response. Unless I'm well regarded in the office, I'm not worth anything. Habit 3, keep all computer notifications turned on and keep my phone on and in sight while I work. Wrong belief. I need to know what's going on out there. The most recent thing is the most important thing. The best way to love my neighbors is to stay updated on dramatic headlines and new memes, not to do focused work. And he gets into other things as well, about ways that when we practice bad habits, that it builds in wrong beliefs. So, what about for me? Spend time in the evening mindlessly looking over blogs and news items. So the belief then is I will be the best version of myself when pursuing comfort and information. Is that true? How about this? Give correction and explanation to my children whenever I see them doing something they shouldn't do. Belief. I am solely responsible for the future of my children. And if they know the right thing, they will be fine. My question is that what do our habits say about us? What are the things that we are practicing religiously or regularly that are forming and forging wrong beliefs in us? Recognizing that also that they're good habits that form good beliefs in us. So here are just some things. I give to the church that I'm a member of. Okay? The belief that builds in is that my life belongs to God, and I trust Him more each time I do these things. That's a really good habit that instills a good belief in us. Another thing is that I greet my family members with displays of affection when I come home. Belief that they are worthy of my love no matter what. So what do the habits in our life say about us? And I'm going to I want y'all to be able to practice this a little bit. If you have your paper, turn it to the backside, there's a chart. And so what I'd like us all to do is to take about 5 minutes to think about what are 2 good habits in my life, what are 2 bad habits in my life, and what beliefs do they build into my life? What beliefs do they form and forge into my life? So think about things that you just habitually do. They can be things as small as how you immediately react to something that happens, or they can be as big as weekly practices that you are committed to do, or annual, whatever. But what are things that are habitual in your life that and what are the beliefs that they form in you when you do them? So that's fun, right? I wonder if anyone wanted to share something they were thinking about in this. There's no pressure. That the goal of this time was, again, what I said at the beginning, to try to create space for us to think about some of these things. And we're going to get to a therefore, what do we do with some of this next? But yeah, I was curious if anyone wanted to share anything that they noticed in as they were doing this exercise. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I noticed that too. Anything else from this fun? Yeah. Hmm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, thanks for engaging in this. I hope these are the kind of things that we do regularly, or find some way to do them in your life, of just to say, what's the infrastructure of my life producing right now? I know different seasons make it easier than others. Um, Kristen and I got away at the very beginning of January to try to do this kind of from a family standpoint, from goals and other things. And then a week later, I tore my Achilles, which kind of threw off a lot of those things. So you don't know how it's going to go, but it's still a valuable thing to say, what are the things that are important that I value in my life? And recognizing there are a lot of things we can't control. So now we're going to try to detour back into spiritual disciplines. Okay, so hopefully this has kind of been a bit of a journey, and we're going to get back into spiritual disciplines, and here's why. My experience has been, so as a kind of pastor working in adult ministry, is that spiritual disciplines are really hard to encourage people to do. And here's why I think that is. I think because most of the time that we think about them like vitamins or supplements, of like, oh, yeah, I'll just take a vitamin with my breakfast. Yeah, that's easy to do. Yeah, and if I forget, that's okay, not a big deal. But we think about them as kind of small things that can just be added in to life, when in reality, I don't necessarily think that's true. And what tends to happen as we get older is that the stuff of life becomes fuller, but also that our regular habits and patterns become more set, which again can be a really good thing, or it can be a less good thing, depending. But the more full and the more set our stuff is, if you think about it like concrete that's setting, the harder it is to put a new thing in. And often, that new things can't really get into concrete that's solidified unless there's a breaking that happens. And so I think part of the problem with spiritual disciplines is often they're thought about like this thing that can just be kind of added in, or kind of we'll paint the concrete a nice green color, when I think that they are intended often to be a little bit bigger. And it's hard to figure out where they fit in life when life feels already full. And so some of the reason to go back and to reassess the different habits in our life is to say, where are places where I can celebrate? Because we should celebrate. What are the good habits in our life? Where are the things that I'm seeing fruit, that I'm seeing how this beautiful thing has happened so much that it's become habitual, that I get to celebrate it and honor it and own it? But also, where are the places where, gosh, that there has been this habit that I've let it take me into this area that I don't like. I don't want to be there. I don't want to live there. I don't want to be formed by that, but I see that it's doing that. And then so spiritual disciplines come in and say, Well, in this place that we don't want to be, how do we engage a spiritual discipline in that place to steer us in a different direction? How do we see the crack in the sidewalk there and even begin to fill it with something that might actually bring wholeness to the big picture? That's, I think, a better picture of what spiritual disciplines do than just like kind of dropping some dust in and hoping that everything is going to get better. Because our habits form us. And that I think spiritual disciplines are often really hard to do. So my first experience of this was trying to do a Sabbath in college. And I remember that I said, all right, I'm not going to do any schoolwork on Sundays. But what I found very quickly is that made the other 6 days of my week really hard. Because if I'm going to get to Sunday and not have any schoolwork to do and actually take my schoolwork seriously, then I have to backtrack the other 6 days and figure out what changes need to be made along the way and what hard changes need to be made, like, oh, I need to stay up later and do this because I want to be able to be free on Sunday. Again, not in a legalistic way. I'm just saying that was my first experience of realizing, wow, a habit here changes everything else. And that's, I think, what habits do. So one way to think about spiritual disciplines might be, and this is why this book is drawn like this, is that he talks about spiritual disciplines as a garden trellis, or a trellis for our life. And if you've grown tomatoes or other vining plants, you know that they don't need a trellis, but if you don't put them on a trellis, you're not going to get good fruit. There's a greater likelihood of disease. They're not going to become as full as they could because they're just on the ground getting covered up. They might get moldy, they might get diseased, or if you have chickens, the chickens might get them. And you don't want that to happen. So you have to put them up on a trellis so that they can grow, be fruitful. And that he talks about our lives, or thinking about our life or our calendar being a trellis on which God can grow us. So spiritual disciplines being frames that we put into our life to help us be fruitful and grow on. Which again, trellises can be hard work. So that they direct us to where to go, they give space in our life, but they also help us to powerfully fight against the temptations of the world and of our flesh, or to fight against the chickens that want to nibble on everything. So I hope that, so he gives some examples. So that's what's on the other part of the sheet, is that I'm going to just very, very briefly walk through this, that he gives a few different habits that could be recommended practices to take on, and he says, hey, you can do one of these at a time. You could try to do several at a time. You can just choose the ones that are going to be useful to you. It's not like it's not a new legalism. It's here's some ideas of things you can put into your life. So I'll share them and see what maybe other ideas for spiritual practices that this could produce for you. So he separates them into one, which are the things that are for loving neighbor more, which are the things that are more for loving God. Which are the things that are going to allow me to embrace what God wants? Which are the things that are going to allow me to resist the pulls of the world or my flesh? And then breaks them down into 4 daily practices and 4 weekly practices. And again, this is all online. This is in the book, but just going over. So the daily practices that he gives are a meal with others. That's this fork and the spoon. So moving clockwise, limiting screen time. That's 1 hour with your phone off every day. Then the Bible would be scripture before phone every day. So resisting the pull of what the phone might say, but choosing scripture first. And then the hammer in the heart is for kneeling prayer 3 times a day. Weekly habits, again, starting in the top right quadrant, would be 1 hour of conversation with a friend each week. This computer screen would be to curate media to X amount of hours a week. The bread with the X through it is 24 hours of fasting from something, and then the pillow is a Sabbath. So giving different ideas, suggestions of what different practices could look like, and I think what's helpful about his approach is he's trying to say, what are either the things in the world that I need to resist, whether it's the pull of media, the pull of work, the pull of my own comfort, and then how do I build habits to resist those things? And then what are things that I need to embrace? That I need to embrace about who God is or in the world, and how do I build habits to help me do that also? So that's kind of what he's getting at. So I want us to begin to think as you're thinking about what this might mean for you, what could a certain discipline in your life make possible or impossible? How might you choose disciplines in your life that could help to reorder your loves? If you're finding that you're loving something inordinately, if you're loving something too much, how do you put a discipline in place so that the love flowing to that thing doesn't flow there as strongly? Or that if you find that your heart is cool towards God, how might you prioritize your life so that love for Him could flow more readily? And to ask these things another way is that how could new infrastructure lead you to reimagine your life? So where might we start? Here's some suggestions if you need places to start, more ideas. One would be, what could you fast from during Holy Week? Holy Week is coming up very quickly. Might there be something you fast from for Holy Week, or might you fast from the Good Friday service through Saturday night or Sunday morning? That could be a way to approach that. What kind of Easter celebration might you do? Remember, celebration was a discipline, right? And it was a corporate discipline. Might there be people who you would bring into your life for Easter as a way to celebrate the resurrection? That Jesus just didn't rise for you personally, but for all of us. We're going to be studying the book of Exodus after Easter, and so maybe you want to start a reading plan where you're going to read through Exodus and build in some resources so you can do a deeper study of that book of the Bible. Or maybe you might think about the first words that you hear every day, the first words you say, whether in the morning or when you go into a new place, the first thoughts that you have when you're walking through the door to your place of work or a store, or what might that kind of spiritual discipline look like also? Here's some scripture just to close this, and then I would love to, if there are any questions, I can take questions. Colossians 3:12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. I think the scripture speaks to we should clothe ourselves. What might spiritual disciplines be that you clothe yourself with, asking God to build compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience in you? Philippians 2. Therefore, my friends, as you've always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Why? For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill His good purpose. So again, the call to spiritual disciplines of doing them, asking that God would work in abundance in that place. In Matthew 11, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus promises that when we follow Him, that's actually the path to freedom. Dallas Willard says, we can become like Christ by doing one thing, by following Him in the overall style of life He chose for Himself. If we have faith in Christ, we must believe He knew how to live. Or to put it another way in some of our language, if we want to learn to look and love like Jesus, we might start by learning to live like Jesus. All right, thus ends all that I wanted to share. Thanks for being here. I'm happy to take questions, or I can send you to discussion around tables for 3.5 minutes. So